but historical. We are very proud and honored to have you all here today. Our first session of the day, the time for Latin America and Brazil, will talk about the past decade. The Brazilian innovation and entrepreneur ecosystem has matured. In the past 2 years, we saw the first tech IPOs, unicorn acquisitions, the rise of seed and growth stage fund, and records in venture capital investments and growth of foreign investments. Brazil is perfectly positioned to be a leading innovator across a diverse range of industries. This has caught the eye of several venture capital firms, and recently Softbank launched a $5 billion fund focused in Latin America. This session will explore what potential upsides and risks such firms see in the country's tech scene, and why this positive cycle is different and more sustainable from the ones we have seen in the past. For this discussion, we will have Marcelo Claure, moderated by Julio Vasconcellos. Marcelo is CEO of Softbank Group Corp. He jointly oversees the strategic direction of the Tokyo-based multinational conglomerate. He also serves as CEO of Softbank Group International, where he is responsible for overseeing the vast portfolio of the group operating companies. Marcelo is also CEO of Softbank in Latin America, manager of the largest ever technology fund focused exclusively on the region. In this role, he will invest in early-stage opportunities in the region and be responsible for broadening the geographic reach of Softbank's portfolio of companies in Latin America. Prior to joining Softbank, Claure served as president and CEO of Sprint, founded Brightstar, and built it into the world's largest global wireless distribution and services company. Claure is a board member of Softbank, executive chairman of Sprint, and among many other awards, he was named a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. He received a Bachelor of Science in Economics and Finance and an honorary doctorate of Commercial Science from Bentley University. He is married and has 6 children. We will also have Julio Vasconcellos. He's an investor and founder of technology companies, both in Silicon Valley and in Brazil. Early in his career, Julio became Facebook's first representative in Brazil, leading the company's growth efforts in the region. He left Facebook to found Peixe Urbano, at the time the largest online local services company in Latin America, growing the company to over 1,200 employees in 8 countries. After selling Peixe Urbano to Baidu, Julio moved back to San Francisco in 2016 and joined Prefer as its founding CEO. Julio has been an active investor since 2011. Most recently, he has been active as founding partner of Canary, having invested in over 40 companies in the past 2 years. Julio is graduated of Stanford's Business School and the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Please join me in welcoming Marcelo and Julio.
Good morning. Welcome, Marcelo. I'm glad you're able to make it today. Also wanted to thank everyone that's organized such a wonderful, wonderful conference. It's quite amazing how good it's been. Really can see the sort of the fruit of all the hard work that we've had here. But Marcelo, before we start getting a little deeper into your history, I think there's a lot of interesting things we want to talk about. I think everyone here knows the big announcement that you have this new $5 billion tech fund focused on Latin America. And I'm going to start off with a question that must be on everyone's mind. How the hell are you going to invest all that money?
So thank you, Julio. Thank you, Stanford, and all the people, Hugo and everybody who put this event. I I was blown away yesterday when you walk in and you see so many people from Brazil who've been able to make it here. And that tells you the special moment that we're living in Latin America, the special moment that we're living in Brazil. And from our end, from Softbank, we could not be more excited to basically get into Latin America. And a lot of people say, like, why now? And there's truly, apart from the fact that we have a lot of enormous expectations for Brazil and what Brazil is going to do in the region and Latin America, I'll just be fairly honest with you. I've been part of the Softbank group since 2012, so it's been now close to 6-7 years that I've been involved. And I have the luxury of sitting down in Japan, in Tokyo, and we share a conference room with Masa, who's my boss. And every single day we meet 5, 6, 8 entrepreneurs, and all of them, or 99%, they're either from China, they're from India, or they're from the United States. And I sit back, and I always, in the back of my mind, I say, like, most of these companies, most of these amazing innovation and disruptions that we see on a day-to-day basis, in the back of my mind, I say, this can happen in Latin America. I'm originally from Bolivia, so I'm Latin at heart, and I love my continent, I love Bolivia. And I see it every day, and one day I woke up and I say, Masa, I want to ask you a question. I said, why in the world aren't we in Latin America? And he scratched his head and he says, well, it's too far. They speak a different language. There's too much currency fluctuations. They're impeaching president. It just seems difficult. And then I told him, I said, give me a couple of weeks. Let me show you why Latin America can be an amazing place for us to go. So I came back and I started putting some data that, to be quite honest, I truly didn't know. And I say, if you look at Latin America from its size, we've been so excited about India. We're the largest foreign direct investor in India. We made a commitment to invest $10 billion into India. And then I started looking at some numbers and I say, Latin America is actually 2x the GDP of India, right? Latin American people make 4 times the amount of money as India, or internet penetration is much higher. I look at all those trends and I say, that's fascinating. And then I start comparing them against China, which we are, again, the largest foreign direct investor in China. And I say people in Latin America make as much money as Chinese, and our economy, is half the size of China. So we put all this together and we say, the time has come. I said, let's put together a technology fund. Let's replicate the same business model that we have applied to investing, and let's put the right number into Latin America in order for us to invest. And the logic came and say, SoftBank today has about $400 billion of assets under management that we manage in our portfolio. And the logic should be, if Latin America GDP is 8% of the world, then we should have about $30 billion invested in Latin America. And all we have is 150 or 100 something million dollars that we invested into a great entrepreneur in a company called Logi. And that was the beginning a couple of years back. So we look at it, we say, let's start with a fund. Let's put a good number to start. We think $5 billion is a good number to start. And we hope that this will just be the beginning of many more investments that we plan to do in Latin America. So that's the idea, is $5 billion. Since we announced the fund probably a couple of weeks back, we are looking at over 140 companies already. We're engaged with the entire community, and we feel certain that $5 billion is a number that you can put to work in Latin America without an absolute problem.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the big thesis and vision is at SoftBank of the future of technology, how that's going to impact the entire world, and how you see that applying to Latin America?
Yep. So I don't know how many of you have had a chance to meet Masa or or understand or listen to one of the conferences or when we've spoken, but we're pretty clear in terms of how do we invest in company and what is our mandate. And we go back and we say that the world is entering into the most exciting time it's ever been to, and we call it the artificial intelligence revolution. We've done quite well in the previous revolution, which is, we call it the broadband or the digital revolution, in which we have some of the world's leading companies have been created. So for example, we look at the broadband world, the internet world, we were an early investor into, back then, a small company called Alibaba, which SoftBank placed an investment of $20 million, and that translated to having a valuation over $120 or $130 billion, which is probably one of the best investments ever made. But that was part of we call that the broadband revolution. And then because of that, you've had companies like Tencent or Facebook or Alibaba or Google, that basically they have learned how to use the internet in order for them to have a disruptive business model. So what has been disrupted? Pretty much advertising, right? Facebook, main source of income today is advertising. Google, main source of income is advertising. And the two great e-commerce companies, Alibaba and Amazon, basically were as a result of an initial disruption of the way people shop. And I call it initial because even though the companies are enormous, still a small percentage of goods go through Alibaba or go through Amazon. So now comes, we've been talking about this for a while, and we've been talking the day has come, or the day will come, when machines are more powerful than humans. We say that over the course of the last 10 years, the processing power of a machine, the storage, the speed has been growing to the point where we believe it's at a point where it's very similar to the human mind. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depends on who you want to ask, this trend is going to get accelerated tremendously. And we expect 10 years from now, 15 years from now, that the capacity of a machine is going to be 1 million times bigger than the capacity of the human mind. Meaning artificial intelligence has arrived, and artificial intelligence is going to disrupt everything. And we call it, we're the beginning of the artificial intelligence revolution, which we think the level of disruption that you're going to see in the next 20 years is going to be much bigger than anything we've seen in the last 300 years. So what does that mean? That means that pretty much every single industry as we know it is going to be disrupted one way or another. So our mandate is quite simple. It's quite broad, but it's quite narrow. We like to invest in companies that have the ability to utilize data, or companies that have the ability to utilize artificial intelligence to disrupt traditional industries in order to enhance the way we live. So that's our mandate. Now that includes many, many different industries, and that's what we are, we go around the world looking for that cluster of number ones, or for that number one company that has the ability to disrupt traditional business models. And I go, if you allow me to basically repeat one basic thing, is in the last few years, only one industry or 1.5 industries have been disrupted, and that is advertising. And advertising is a tiny percentage of the world's GDP. And I think what we're going to see the disruption in these coming years is industries that are in the trillions of dollars are going to be disrupted, which means what we're going to live in our life is going to be fascinating in the terms the way we change the way people live. So those are the companies we're looking for.
I don't want us to lose the perspective of how all of this starts, right? I think before you were talking about the global AI revolution and went into the investment world, you were a very successful CEO. Before that, you were a very successful entrepreneur, building a global company with Brightstar. And I want you to take us back a little bit to the beginning of Brightstar, when you were selling cell phones out of basically the trunk of your car, and thinking about what that entrepreneurial journey was like, and what you saw in yourself back then as an entrepreneur, and how that has shaped the types of entrepreneurs that you look for to invest in.
So thank you. So as I said, my case is not supposed to happen. You rarely do have a Bolivian, a small country, as neighbor to Brazil, who Bolivia traditionally had not produced too many entrepreneurs, or had not produced, to be fair, many leading companies at all. So I got very lucky. I started a small business back in 1997, and I with very little money, I started selling phones out of the back of my car back in between Miami and Bolivia. And then we figured earlier on that there were tremendous pricing inefficiencies throughout the world. So we started a distribution company that later evolved to be the leading global supply chain company in the wireless industry, went on to be one of the leading insurance companies in the wireless industry, and the largest buyback and trading company. And to me, that was unique because it was one of the very few times that you can have a Latin American company actually become number one in the world, right? I was talking to Carlos Brito yesterday, and we were comparing notes, and I said, there's probably, we can count on 5, if that, of Latin American companies that become a goods or services companies that became number one in the world. So my company, Brightstar, grew from 0 to over $15 billion in revenue, present in 70 countries around the world, all organic, no acquisitions, and we actually built, the world's largest company. And something that I took a lot of pride was we built the largest Hispanic-owned company in U.S. history. So that was probably one of the biggest moments of pride. And just pure coincidence of life, as I was in my pursuit of traveling around the world, growing Brightstar's business, I was able to meet what I call today, the most visionary and probably the best technologists in the world, which is Masa. I had a chance to meet him in Tokyo. I went to basically sell him a concept that there was money in the used phone business, that instead of throwing away those used phones, he should buy them and give him credit to his customers. And the first question that he asked me was, how long, and by then I had convinced Apple, AT&T, Verizon, most carriers around the world, and I used to manage their buyback and trading. And it usually took 9 months for us to set this in all the Apple stores. It took a year to set up in Verizon. And this tells you a little the way we function. And I showed Masa what we did, and Masa asked me, hey, can you get this done in 3 days? And we basically flew a team of engineers. We translated software to Japan. We were in 10,000 stores in 2 days. And we developed an amazing friendship. And then Masa invited me to be to join the board of Sprint, which to me, I remember sitting in my first board meeting. I could not believe it, that, hey, from being a distributor, now I was sitting in a board of a 120-year-old iconic company called Sprint. We got to know each other, and a month later, after Sprint tried to buy T-Mobile, the government rejected, Masa called me to the side and he asked me, he said, why, now that this merger is not going to go through, what should we do? And I told him, I said, maybe it's time for us to look at the management team and make some changes, because this company is going to require a massive, massive turnaround. And Masa basically looked at me and says, I have a great idea. I said, why don't you become CEO of Sprint? Which was quite shocking to me. And I told him there was probably somebody more qualified. And Masa told me, look, you're a street fighter like me. I will teach you the technology. And then I said, I can't, because I own Brightstar, and Brightstar is very large. And Masa said, don't worry, I can buy Brightstar from you in 24 hours. And he said, let's call Goldman Sachs, have Goldman Sachs basically put an amount to it. And then, the following day, but I need you, and this is why Brazil is so big in my heart. He says, I need you to start next week. And I said, Masa, it's 2014. I have to go to the finals of the World Cup in Brazil. I said, and I promise you that I will fly straight from Rio de Janeiro to Kansas City, where Sprint is, Sunday night after the game. So I was at Rio, I watched the finals, and then I undertook what was probably fascinating for me, landing into Kansas City, leading one of America's most iconic companies. Sprint was founded in 1899, a company that was in financial dire straits. We fast forward 4.5 years, the company delivered their best financial result in this 120-year history. Company became profitable. We stopped losing customers. So we put Sprint back on track. And then when I thought I was done, we finally did the merger with T-Mobile, that hopefully the US government will make the right decision and allow this merger to happen. And then I went to Masa and I said, okay, Masa, I have fulfilled my obligations to you. I've fixed Sprint. I have thank you for buying Brightstar. You definitely changed my life. And then Masa says, you are a good entrepreneur. I'll give you credit for that. He says, you're a good operator. He says, but you suck at investing. So I said, well, you're probably right. I've never done any investing. So he said, why don't you move to Tokyo, sit next to me. He says, I'm a pretty good investor, he says. And why don't I teach you investing? Come over for a year, come over for 2 years. I'm going to teach you how to invest. And then you can help me run Softbank, and we plan to grow Softbank. So that's been a little my story. And today, I'm privileged, I'm humble. Every day I show up in the office in Tokyo, and today we run by far the world's largest tech fund. We invest about $1 billion every week, 10 days. We're investing in a company every 10 days. And we're determined, to build the world's most valuable company, and working together with Masa.
So it's really probably the world's largest acqui-hire ever, that transition into Sprint. I'm wondering what you learned. You talked a little bit about the epic investment that Masa made in Alibaba way back then, and you had the privilege of sitting next to him and learning how to invest from maybe one of the world's best investors. What did he teach you during that period?
So if you look at a little the history of Softbank, right, and this is public, and we've published in our IR, Softbank has a track record of investing, of generating a 44% IRR over the course of the last 18 years. And that's, even if you take the number one investment out, we still have a 42% IRR. So that is a high benchmark, and every single investment, when we look at it, we will not accept or we will not do an investment that we don't have conviction that that company has the capability to beat our IRR. So when you look at every company that we look, we say, do we believe that this company, we don't want to ruin our average. So every time, if I do a bad investment that's below 44%, I'm bringing the average down. So first and foremost is we have huge ambitions and we're going to invest in companies. We first want to find the right entrepreneur. Do we have the right entrepreneur that has the same vision to want to be number one, right? Secondly, we try to invest in companies that are already number one or number two, preferably number one. We found that Sprint taught us a big lesson. You know, it's a lot nicer when you're number one. We choose an industry that we think that we know is going to be disrupted, okay? And then we look whether this company is using technology or has the capability to utilize technology to massively disrupt, you know, some markets. So I don't know, I'll give you an idea. I'll talk to you about ride sharing. Earlier on, we saw it was easy to say that it was a matter of time between that ride sharing was going to massively disrupt the way people and the way goods move. And it didn't take a rocket science if you go back 4 years ago that you open an app, you press that you needed an Uber, and an Uber mysteriously showed up 10 minutes later, and the experience was beautiful compared to one of those yellow taxis in New York. So it wasn't that long, I would say 5 years ago, so we knew that this was eventually going to be a great category. So what we did is we pretty much bet on every horse, right? We bet on Uber, we're the largest shareholder in Uber. Then we went to China and we saw that Didi was the same. We bet in Didi. Then we went to Southeast Asia. We bet in Grab. Then we went to India and we bet in Ola. And back then we actually put a little investment in a company called 99 that we then sold that investment to Didi because then we had one of our companies there. So that has proven to be, you know, a great investment for us. You know, the Lyft IPO just reiterate that the type of return that investment will yield to us. So we knew that was a category and we knew that's going to change, right? We look at the food delivery business. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science to know that if you press an app and great food gets delivered to you in less than 15 or 20 minutes, it's a lot better than getting onto your car or cooking at home. So we believe that is an enormous category. We look at, you know, the way people work today, right? We went and once we were in one place and we saw how cool, how great it was to basically walk into a WeWork facility and be able to work in a place where there's culture, where if I need to add 10 or 20 desks the following day, it's just a phone call away. So we love WeWork, and then we invested in WeWork, and we see a huge trend towards co-living and all that. So we have all these industries that we believe that are changing, they're using data, they're being disrupted, and then we basically go after those companies.
It's interesting you talked about ride-sharing, food delivery, and I think a lot of the international landscape that exists out there. And I'm curious what your perspective is on the future of Latin America, whether it's going to look more like the US peer companies or more like things that you're seeing out in China and Southeast Asia.
So first of all, in the last, I think we announced the fund 3 weeks ago. I've had a chance to visit most of our Latin American countries. I've had a chance to meet with most of our political leaders, with most of the venture community, with the early investors in those communities, with a tremendous amount of entrepreneurs. And I am blown away how there are so many companies that have been able to sort of study what is going on in other parts of the world and be able to bring a company into a market like Brazil. And I wouldn't say copy, because that's not the right word, because they're true innovators that are localizing the model and be able to adapt it to the needs of Brazil or to the needs of Argentina or to the needs of Colombia or to the needs of Mexico. So I look and I was looking at my portfolio of companies. We have 72 companies in the Vision Fund that we have invested. And then I probably have 140 companies that look the same, right? In the food delivery business, in the real estate business, in health, in healthcare, in transportation, in logistics. And in many cases, I'll tell you, some of these Latin American companies are better than our Asian American or Indian companies. So I think it's a combination of both. And I think what we are going to bring to Latin America is something unique, right? The experience that we've had in investing in these companies in Asia, in India, in the US, in Southeast Asia, and how we can help the local entrepreneurs to make sure that they don't make the same mistakes, because there have been so many mistakes. These great companies, these great number ones that you see today, it's not that everything went perfect. They went through some tough roadblocks, they went through tough obstacles, and our goal want to make sure that as we invest in these companies, we can provide some basic input, say, hey, you might want to look at these things a little bit different because this is the way things work. So I would say, when we come to the region, yes, we come with a significant capital, and I believe capital has been one of the main reasons why we haven't had more unicorns or why we haven't more companies flourish. But at the same time, I think we bring a little bit of experience to be able to help them as we become board members and give them an idea of the things that we've seen in other parts of the world. So I think Latin America is going to be a combination of many other companies. Now, I'm also going to say something that I was blown away, and I've also met some entrepreneurs that are building companies that haven't been built in other parts of the world, right? I met an entrepreneur a few months back, Cesar from Gympass, and that is a unique business model, built in Latin America that's been exported all over the world. And I look at that, and I'm sure there's many other Cesar Carvalhos in Brazil, in Argentina, in Mexico that are building unique business models that can be exported to other parts of the world.
Yeah, and I want to highlight something that you said, that oftentimes the companies you meet in Latin America, you actually think that they're global best practice cases, some of the best entrepreneurs, the best companies. And in the investment philosophy that you have when you invest in a company, say in Brazil, are you imagining that that company is going to be a national winner, a regional winner, or are you looking for true global companies coming out of Brazil and Latin America?
So we have a three-step approach when we're looking. First, we want to find that global champion. We want to find that Latin American entrepreneur who's built a very unique business model that we can plug them into the Softbank ecosystem. I think we have the most fascinating tech ecosystem in the world. We have a cluster of 70 companies that are number one, and in many cases, once a company joins the Softbank family, they're part of a cluster, they're part of a family, and we help those companies grow throughout the world. We help them expand to other territories. We help them pair themselves with other companies that they can transfer technology. We help them do joint ventures. So very different than traditional venture or traditional private equity in terms of they're looking for a different type of return. We bring our companies, we make them part of the family. We are long-term thinkers. In the case of the fund for Latin America, it's permanent capital, so there's no hurry in terms of getting an immediate return. So that is what we're looking. Number two, and we're going to find a lot, is we're going to find great entrepreneurs with a great business model locally, but in many cases, we can complement with technology. And then we can bring one of our companies from other parts of the world, and then you have an explosive combination of potential, an amazing technology company with global know-how, with a local entrepreneur, with a local business model. And I think you can create companies that you might want to win a country, but then you might want to win the region. And the third one, which we're prepared to do, that hopefully there are not that many of those, is we will bring our portfolio companies, again, we have 70-something companies, that there's not a meeting that I didn't go that they tell me, hey, how can I get into Brazil? How can I get into Argentina? How can I get into Mexico? I hear it's very difficult. And a lot of these are just true technology companies with limited go-to-market experience, where they're going to go first to the US, China, and India, where at one point they were bigger markets. So that is the way we're going to pursue this. Hopefully we're going to find a lot of great entrepreneurs. The ones that I've met, the ones I had dinner with last night, that you were part of, Julio, they were fascinating. I mean, we met some amazing entrepreneurs that are looking at the world, that they want to disrupt the world with us. We're going to support them. And one thing that the common denominator, after having met with so many entrepreneurs, is the lack of capital for growth capital in Latin America. I was so positively impressed when I saw companies like what you did with Canary and your partners in terms of helping fund the seed investors. I think there's 4 amazing venture capitals. You look at Kasek, you look at Monashis, you look at Valor, you look at Redpoint that are here, and they've done an incredible job in terms of doing that Series A, doing that first round. They do the hard job of looking at thousands of companies and funding that. But then the problem is what happens after? What happens to Series B, Series C, Series D? Then they got to depend on potential Silicon Valley entrepreneur to look at it. But they're very selective here because the deal flow is very, very solid here. So we believe that by bringing the Softbank culture, the way we invest, being truly, truly local, understanding the market, and partnering with entrepreneurs from a Series B, we're going to have the ability to write checks as little as $15 million and as big as $1 billion. And we are sure we're going to find those companies. We have a team now. In these last 3 weeks, I have 2 of my Brazilian partners that are here. We hired yesterday, or this morning, we announced we're going to have somebody called André Maciel, that he should be somewhere in the room. He joined yesterday, was his first day. We have Paolo Passoni, who's also joining us beginning today. And we brought some of the best people at the Vision Fund, Shu and others, who are going to be part of the team. So we have a team now. We're meeting with entrepreneurs. We have looking at 140 companies. We're in due diligence in 20 companies. And then hopefully, we should be announcing our first sort of investments in the coming weeks.
So let me push back a little bit on this. So if you talk to a lot of fund managers out there, I think they'll say things like, money doesn't solve all problems. Softbank is investing too much money in companies, paying too high of a price. What do you have to say to the critics? And do you have any numbers that you can share with us?
We'll start by saying, I don't think there's any other private investor that has a track record or a 44% IRR over the course of the last 18 years. Doesn't exist. You can look at, so therefore, I think the best way is you let the numbers speak for themselves. 2 is we look for long-term partnership with entrepreneurs. We believe that once you find a winning business model in which the unit economics work, then you should provide the entrepreneur the amount of capital that they need in order for them to win, right? We're not believers in terms of, hey, let me give you a little now, come back later. We're going to partner with you all the way, and then we're going to help you become number 1, and we want you to become number 1 in the world. So we're going to provide the capital that they need. When you have an honest conversation with entrepreneurs, they say, look, I'm sick and tired of half my time being wasted in terms of traveling around the world trying to raise money, and the other half basically running a business. Once we find an entrepreneur that we're going to back, and we back entrepreneurs, we don't run companies, we don't like to be involved in teaching them how to run a company. Once we believe in an entrepreneur, we're going to back that entrepreneur, we're going to back the business model, and then we're going to provide them the amount of capital that they need, and we're always going to be with them. And then secondly is we help our entrepreneurs grow. When you look at this, I'll show you someday, it's basically this cluster that shows, or you can go online and see it, how there's 72 companies that are, we believe, number 1 in every industry, and once that entrepreneur is part of our family, they come into our family, and therefore there's enormous opportunities to grow. And maybe I'll tell you probably one of the stories that I like the most, right? And I don't know how many of you have heard of a company called Oyo. Imagine, why don't you raise your hand if somebody has heard from Oyo? Okay, so that's pretty good, usually, and that's because you've done your work. Usually when I go and I speak, less than 10% of a company heard from Oyo. And Oyo is an entrepreneur from India. When we met him, he was 22 years old, and he had a very clear business model, and that is most of the hotels in the world are independent hotels. The quality of service that they provide is substandard. The occupancy rates are incredibly low. The marketing ability on the web is very low. So basically, this entrepreneur went and he proved a model that if you go to an independent hotel, you standardize to make sure the place is clean, to make sure the walls are properly painted, to make sure that the reservation system is done online, and you start using SEO and you start using the web, you can massively increase the occupancy rate from whatever, 20, 30% to 70, 80%. And most of the world is independent hotels. So we love the business case. I think the first investment were a few $100 million. And then you've seen this company, Oyo, who started adding 2,000 hotels a month, then 2,000 hotel rooms. Then the next month was 4,000, then 8,000, then 10,000, then 20, then 30, then 50,000. So when you look at Marriott, it took him 120 years to build 1.2 million rooms. we believe Oyo, in the course of the next 2 years, is going to be by far the #1 hotel company in the world, right? I mean, they're adding tens of thousands of rooms every single month. And when you look at Marriott or Hilton, they add 1,000 or 2,000 hotel rooms a month, so we're going to catch up to them quite fast. But that is a perfect idea of an entrepreneur from India who uses technology to better run hotels. We do tens of millions of pricing changes every day, utilizing dynamic pricing to maximize revenue. But we found a model where there's a huge market, you're using artificial intelligence, and there's a fragmented supply of hotels. So we think Oyo is going to be an amazing company, but it's as simple as finding that entrepreneur, winning business model, and then be able to provide them the right amount of capital for that entrepreneur to grow. And we are going to work real hard with Oyo in Latin America to make sure we have aspirations 1 or 2 years to basically grow Oyo to potentially be one of the leading hotel chains in Latin America. And like that, we got story after story after story. So we don't believe that you should, hey, let me see if I can squeeze a little more from an entrepreneur. The returns are enormous if you find a good business model where you're going to have explosive growth. We like exponential growth. We're exponential thinkers. We're not linear thinkers that we're going to grow 10, 20% year over year. We like businesses that are growing 30, 40% month over month, or businesses that grow a couple of 100% year over year.
I know during your trip to Latin America, you also had an opportunity to meet with a lot of government leaders. And I want to shift the conversation a little bit to that topic. And I want to see what do you see the role of government in fostering innovation and entrepreneurship? And I think more specifically also how you as Softbank plan to work with the government or through the public sector in a way to foster entrepreneurship. I think there's a very interesting example that happened recently. I think you guys announced in Abu Dhabi, the big innovation port with the government of the UAE. And I'm wondering whether anything like that could be in the cards for Brazil.
Yeah. So it was a great meeting. I'll tell you that everybody was incredibly welcoming. It helps, again, that Softbank is a larger foreign investor in China, India, and the US. So, we want to play a similar role in Latin America. But I think some of the initial conversations with government were a little harsh and saying, look, if you want your countries to flourish, if you want to be part of the new economy, because this new economy is going to come, whether government likes it, whether traditional enterprise likes it or not. I mean, transportation is going to be disrupted, hospitality is going to be disrupted, healthcare is going to be disrupted. Pretty much every industry that we're part of is going to undergo through a massive disruption. And my advice to government is take a proactive approach to this. Change regulation from the early stage. Don't wait till, like for an Uber, don't wait till this is so big that you have Uber subscribers. I mean, if you look at Argentina, you have Uber subscribers basically putting pressure on the government for them to allow Uber. I said, don't fight trends and tendencies that are coming. And my message to a lot of these government officials was, this is an incredible opportunity for you to leapfrog, but for that, make it easy to do business in your country. Fix customs, fix the way you open companies. You cannot foster entrepreneurship when it takes you 50, 60, 70 days to basically open a company. When the tax regime, when we have some of our entrepreneurial companies, we have hundreds of tax experts just to figure out how do you deal with tax when you invoice from state to state. I said that should be basics, that should be fixed. And I think there's a good, there are good intentions in terms of fixing the basics to allow entrepreneurship and startups to flourish. So from that end, I think that's going to be taken care of. Secondly, is many cases, I've been to so many Latin American conferences that we like to blame the government in terms for what happens in our countries. I think countries that have so many different barriers are the easiest country to disrupt. I mean, and that's what it takes, that entrepreneurial mindset. I mean, some of our I'll give you an idea how I see healthcare mainly potentially reshaping our countries. In some of our countries today, if you're not part of that elite group that has private insurance, I mean, to go see a doctor in some countries takes 20 days, in some countries it takes 90 days. So best way to cheat the system, go to the emergency room, and then you're going to be seen over there. And the level of misdiagnosis that happens in our countries is, the level of quality of the healthcare that we receive is quite poor, right? So it takes a long time to see a doctor. When you see him, the diagnosis is incorrect, and therefore, it is a bad experience that consumers get. Move to China, right, and look what is happening right now. You have artificial intelligence-enabled robo-doctors, right? I rather, when there's something wrong with me, I'd rather be talking to a robo-doctor who has health records of 800 million people, who the chances they're going to diagnose me correctly is 99.9%, rather than going to see my doctor who has seen 10,000 patients, who's too busy, who's probably tired from last night, who hasn't read the latest medicine journals. And now for that, regulation is going to have to change, because imagine if you had the ability to grab your smartphone, answer the 50 questions that a robot doctor is going to ask you, and they're able to diagnose you with the right amount of, with the right problem that you have, and be able to prescribe you medicine in order for you to get cured, right? I mean, to me, that is an absolute no-brainer, instead of having a broken healthcare system where it takes a long time to see a doctor, the diagnosis is incorrect, and most likely the prescription that they give you is broken, right? Now, I hope that we have visionaries in Latin America that say, what an amazing chance that I have in order to bring artificial intelligence to basically totally and completely disrupt the way we treat patients. I'm going to give you a second example. I don't know how many of you know of a company that were large investors, a company called Guardant Health. Okay, Guardant Health today is a company, it's public, it went public a couple of months ago, that has the ability, or is in the process of developing the ability, that with 2 little pints of blood, we're able to run through genomics, be able to determine what type of cancer do you have, and what is the best treatment for the cancer that you have. Rather than today, if anybody, and I'm sure all of us have had somebody who has cancer, is a patient of cancer, and how painful the process is, right? From having to inject something in order so they can do a tissue, and then basically be able to determine whether you have cancer, and a system of hit and miss of what is going to be the right chemo treatment or not. So all these things are happening. And if I'm a member, if I'm the Minister of Health in a country, and I know about these innovations, I hope that our Latin American leaders basically embrace this, because you can continually redefine, and I'm a big believer that while all of us are still alive, there's going to be a good cure to the vast majority of cancers. So I look at, if I'm a government official, I would love to adopt and bring all this disruption. And I've talked about 2, but there's tens of cases. So hoping that our government officials are basically going to be able to look at this and see an amazing opportunity for them to bring this new economy to their countries, and be able to welcome this in order to leapfrog, because if not, it's going to take a long time.
And I want to remind everyone that we're taking questions via the app. I actually have my eye here on the questions that are coming in and trying to incorporate it. So if you have anything you want to ask Marcelo, just feel free to submit it to the app. And I want to shift the discussion to something maybe a little more fun. Soccer, futebol, I think it's one of your big passions. I think it was actually how you started your professional career. And thinking about entrepreneurship and leadership, you were part of the team that brought Bolivia to the World Cup for the very first time. And I'm wondering what lessons in leadership, in trying to do something that everyone told you was impossible and actually being successful, that you carry today and want to share with the rest of the group here.
So probably if I go, and I said, I've been very blessed, right? I think I have one of the coolest jobs in the world today. And, but I'll say my number one job was being part of a very small group of people who in 1993 had an enormous dream, that was basically to take Bolivia to the World Cup. And taking Bolivia to the World Cup, knowing that we have to play our friends from Brazil or friends from Argentina, it is basically impossible, right? Our country had been trying for the last 70 years, but we had a dream, and the dream was, hey, we're going to take Bolivia to the World Cup for the first time. We had a clear, defined goal. We had objectives. We had a plan how we're going to do it, and miraculously, through a lot of hard work, but having a clear plan, Bolivia made it to the World Cup in 1994. It was the first time ever that Brazil lost the qualifying round in La Paz. And that was probably the biggest lesson that I've ever had. And that is, if you have an amazing team of people, and we had an amazing team of people who have a common belief of a certain goal that it might seem unachievable, because people used to laugh when we told people Bolivia is going to make it to the World Cup, which was a big deal. Our country had been trying for, I think 70, 80 years. And, build a great team, have big dreams, aim big, and then amazing things are going to happen. So that to me was probably one of the most satisfying, if not, bigger than probably building Bright Star, was fulfilling a dream of a nation, of a country, and showing Bolivians that they're as capable as anybody else of achieving their dreams. So that was a fascinating time in my life, and that's how it all got started. And every time I encounter those tough, moments in our life where we say, hey, can we really get this done? I always go back and I say, shit, we did it with Bolivia. And when we took Bolivia to the World Cup, that was a lot harder than pretty much any company that we start or anything that we do today. I mean, it's
So you're also the owner of one of the bigger soccer teams in Bolivia, and not recently, but a couple years ago, teamed up with David Beckham to start an MLS team in Miami. How did you meet David Beckham, and tell us a little bit about that project? That also sounds like a fun story.
So I'm super excited. I found it. I lived in Miami, for many years, 17 years. That's where I started Bright Star. And I love football, and that's why I bought the Bolivian team in Bolivia, Bolivar, which is the largest team in Bolivia. And it just bothered the hell out of me that I had to travel 6 or 7 hours every weekend to go see my team play. So I figured it'll be easier if I can have a team in Miami, then I don't have to travel to La Paz. And La Paz is tough because of the altitude. I mean, it hits you. So I was very lucky. I was having dinner at a friend's house, and I got to meet David Beckham's agent.
What friends were you having dinner with?
I was having dinner at Jennifer Lopez's house, and Jennifer Lopez was doing a show with this guy called Simon Fuller, who was doing American Idol, and Simon was Beckham's manager, and we're all having dinner, and then we're business people, right? So we are entrepreneurs. We're always looking for that chance, and Simon Fuller shows up and says, "Look, when David came and played in LA, he has as part of his contract, he has an option to buy an MLS team for $25 million. I was looking at Google on my phone and I said, my God, a team is worth $200 million today, so there could be some potential good opportunity. So he says, however, he's playing now. When he retires, he needs to figure out where to put his team. Immediately I said, God, there's no team in Miami. This would be real fun. So I told him, look, I will be very interested in partnering with David. Let me know when he's ready. Nothing happens, and about 3 years later, I get a call from Simon and says, hey, do you remember the guy? We had dinner at Jennifer's house. I said, of course I do. He said, well, as you know, David retired. He's not going to play football anymore. He wants to be a football owner. He's never been to Miami, hard to believe, and he doesn't know you. He says, so I have an idea. Why don't I send you David Beckham for a weekend, hang out with him in Miami, and then on Sunday, figure out if you guys get along, and figure out if he likes Miami. So as you can imagine, Miami is quite a happening city. And as a soccer player, it's like you've been in a I don't know, like a lion in a cage for a very long time. So suddenly the lion was out of the cage. David came to Miami, and we had the best weekend. We had the absolute best time. The city fell in love with David. David fell in love with the city. We got along real good. And then we started the painful journey of having to deal with the Miami politicians in terms for us to build a team in Miami. So we've been fighting for the last 6 years. We're finally going to get it done. Our team is going to start playing in 2020. It is the only stadium in the United States that is 100% privately funded. We figured that the only way to get this done is don't ask the government for any money, for anything, for no land, basically pay fair market leases. And we're going to build an amazing, it's going to be our, hundreds of thousands of square feet of retail, hotels, soccer fields, an amazing stadium. And, we're going to play in our temporary stadium in 2020, and we plan to launch our own stadium by 2022. So that is, super exciting. It's a little harder when you live in Japan to have to manage these things. But I could not be more excited of launching my soccer team with David Beckham, having my team in Bolivia. And my dream is to see those teams compete and clash. My Bolivian team against the Miami team.
Who are you going to root for?
For both.
Sounds just like my last weekend. But so you have your team in Bolivia. Now you're going to have your team in the U.S. And I kind of wanted to close just with a little bit of a thank you gift, because I think you probably need to have a team in Brazil. So I think the company organizers got you a little gift I think that you might enjoy of the best team in Brazil.
So this is actually my favorite team, and I'll tell you why. In my pursuit to win the, as you guys call it, Taza Libertadores, I call it Copa Libertadores, the largest we ever made it in Bolivia was when we made it to the semifinals. And the biggest game was beating Flamengo in La Paz and tying with Flamengo in Maracanã. So that was one of the biggest accomplishments of my team. So this is one of my teams. As I was a kid, I used to go to the Fla-Flu games, and I'm a big believer in soccer. And so thank you. And thank you all, and I look forward to working with you for the many more years ahead. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo.